Why some men become emotionless. Most men are not born emotionless. They become that way slowly, not through one heartbreak, not through one betrayal, not through one bad year, but through repeated disappointment, repeated humiliation, repeated emotional punishment from the world around them. At first, they were soft, open, trusting, hopeful. They loved deeply. They cared openly. They believed loyalty would be returned. Then reality arrived, and reality has a brutal way of teaching men one lesson over and over again. No one is coming to save you. That sentence changes everything. Because once a man truly understands that, something inside him begins to harden, not immediately, not visibly, but internally, and eventually people begin to notice. He talks less, laughs less, explains less, trusts less. His silence becomes heavier, his eyes become colder, his presence becomes distant. People call him emotionless, but what they often fail to understand is that emotionless men usually feel too much. They simply learned that showing emotion is dangerous. The modern world often praises emotional vulnerability in men. But many men discover something different through experience. The moment they reveal weakness, they are judged differently. Friends lose respect. Partners lose attraction. People weaponize their pain against them. So the man adapts, because adaptation is survival, and survival changes personality, especially in men. A boy learns emotions through safety. A man learns emotional control through pain. That is why some of the coldest men were once the kindest. The world did not create their emotions. It trained them to hide them. And over time, hiding becomes identity. Many men become emotionless after betrayal. Not ordinary betrayal, not small disappointment, deep betrayal. The kind that changes how they view human nature itself. Maybe it was the woman he trusted completely. Maybe it was family. Maybe it was friends. Maybe it was society itself. But once trust breaks at a deep enough level, the mind changes permanently, because betrayal creates hyper-awareness. The man begins studying people differently. He notices fake smiles, hidden intentions, manipulation, conditional loyalty. He realizes most people are loyal only when it benefits them, and that realization kills innocence. Once innocence dies, warmth often dies with it. This is why many emotionally detached men become extremely observant. Pain sharpened them. They stopped listening to words. They started studying behavior, and behavior reveals uncomfortable truths. Most people love convenience more than loyalty. Most people respect strength more than kindness. Most people stay close only when they need something. A man who learns this too early becomes emotionally guarded, not because he hates people, but because he understands them too well. Another reason some men become emotionless is responsibility. Responsibility changes men more than people realize. When a man understands that people depend on him, he often suppresses emotion to function. Because life does not pause for male suffering. Bills still exist. Pressure still exists. Expectations still exist. A man can be emotionally collapsing internally, but while still being expected to perform externally. That pressure creates emotional compartmentalization. He learns to bury feelings temporarily, then temporarily becomes permanently. Eventually, he no longer knows how to express what he feels. Not because the emotions disappeared, because he disconnected from them to survive. And society rewards this behavior. The emotionally controlled man is often respected more than the emotionally expressive one. People admire stoicism in men, until they realize stoicism often comes from accumulated pain. A man who never reacts emotionally usually has a reason. He learned reactions are expensive. Maybe anger got him punished. Maybe vulnerability got him abandoned. Maybe trust got him betrayed. So now he chooses silence, and silence can become addictive because silence feels safe. No explanations, no emotional exposure, no vulnerability, just distance. Some men become emotionless because they spent years feeling invisible. This happens more often than people admit. Many men quietly live lives where nobody asks how they truly feel. Nobody notices their exhaustion. Nobody notices their loneliness. Nobody notices their mental battles. People often value men based on utility. What can he provide? What can he do? How useful is he? Over time, some men begin feeling loved only for performance, not for who they are. And when a human being feels emotionally unseen long enough, detachment begins, because emotional neglect changes the brain. A neglected man eventually stops trying to be understood. He assumes nobody cares anyway, so he internalizes everything: the anger, the grief, the disappointment, the emptiness, and eventually he becomes emotionally numb. Not peaceful, numb. There is a difference. Peace is emotional balance. Numbness is emotional shutdown. Many men walking around today are not emotionally strong. They are emotionally exhausted. There is a difference between emotional mastery and emotional suppression. One is healthy. The other slowly destroys you internally, but society rarely teaches men the difference. Instead, many men are taught one dangerous rule: handle it alone. So they do, for years, until emotional isolation becomes identity. And isolated men often become psychologically extreme. Some become hyper-disciplined. Some become obsessed with money. Some become cold and manipulative. Some disappear from society completely. Others become addicted to control. Because after chaos, control feels comforting. An emotionless man often structures his entire life around avoiding emotional pain. He avoids attachment, avoids vulnerability, avoids dependence, avoids trust, not because he enjoys loneliness, but because loneliness feels safer than disappointment. That is one of the darkest truths about emotional detachment. Most emotionally cold men are not trying to dominate people. They are trying to protect themselves. The problem is, protection eventually becomes isolation, and prolonged isolation changes human psychology. The isolated man begins losing emotional softness, not intentionally, but through lack of emotional use. Emotions are like muscles. What you stop using weakens. Over time, the man stops expressing affection naturally, stops expressing excitement naturally, stops expressing sadness naturally. Everything becomes muted, flat, controlled, mechanical, and eventually people around him start saying, "You've changed." But they rarely ask what caused the change, because every emotionally detached man has a story, usually several. There is also another uncomfortable truth. Many men become emotionless after realizing how conditional human relationships can be. This realization destroys idealism. A young man often believes loyalty, love, and friendship are unconditional. Life teaches otherwise. People stay when things are easy, disappear when things become difficult, support strength, avoid weakness. Once a man experiences enough conditional relationships, he stops emotionally investing the same way. He becomes cautious, detached, strategic. And this is where emotional coldness sometimes transforms into psychological warfare. Some men stop viewing relationships emotionally altogether. They begin viewing everything transactionally. Conversations become calculated, attachments become temporary. Trust becomes rare because they no longer expect emotional safety from people. And a man who expects nothing emotionally often appears emotionless externally, but internally many of these men are fighting silent battles nobody sees. That is another reality people ignore. Emotionless men are often carrying enormous emotional weight privately. Some are grieving, some are traumatized, some are disappointed in life itself. But they stopped expressing it because expression changed nothing, or worse, made things harder. This is why some men disappear emotionally after repeated failure. Failure changes identity, especially when it happens publicly. A man who repeatedly loses financially, romantically, socially, often develops emotional armor, because failure humiliates, and humiliation changes behavior faster than pain. The man becomes quieter, more defensive, less expressive. He no longer wants people to see his internal world, so he hides it, and eventually, hiding emotions becomes automatic. The dangerous part is this: many emotionally detached men begin confusing numbness with strength. But numbness is not strength. Real strength is emotional control without emotional death. A truly strong man can feel deeply without becoming weak. But many men were never taught that balance. They learned extremes instead. Either emotional chaos or total emotional shutdown. So they chose shutdown, because shutdown hurts less, at least temporarily, but emotional suppression always has a cost. Eventually, the buried emotions leak out somewhere through anger, addiction, isolation, aggression, depression, emotional emptiness. A man can suppress emotion for years, but the mind always keeps score. That is why many emotionally detached men secretly feel exhausted all the time. Suppressing emotion requires enormous psychological energy, especially when the world expects you to remain composed constantly, and many men feel they cannot break, because the moment they break, everything around them collapses too, so they endure silently. This silent endurance is one of the least understood parts of male psychology. People notice male aggression quickly, but they rarely notice male suffering, especially quiet suffering. The man still goes to work, still jokes occasionally, still functions, so nobody realizes how emotionally disconnected he has become internally, until one day, he completely withdraws from life. This is why emotional isolation is dangerous, not because men become villains, but because they stop feeling connected to humanity itself. And disconnected people think differently. They trust less, empathize less, hope less. Some eventually stop believing genuine love even exists. Others stop believing anyone truly understands them. This creates emotional cynicism, and cynicism slowly poisons the mind. The man becomes colder not only toward people, but toward life itself. Nothing excites him anymore. Nothing surprises him anymore, because emotional disappointment trained him to expect less from everything. This is why emotionally detached men often appear extremely calm. It is not always peace. Sometimes it is resignation. They no longer react strongly because they no longer expect strongly. That emotional flatness can look powerful externally, and sometimes it is, but internally, it can feel empty. The truth is, many men do not want to become emotionless. They simply do not know how to remain emotionally open in a world that punished them for it repeatedly. So they adapt, and adaptation can look cold. But underneath the coldness, there is usually an old version of that man buried somewhere. The younger version, the softer version, the hopeful version, the version that once trusted easily. Most emotionally detached men were not born dark. Life slowly convinced them vulnerability was dangerous, and once a man associates vulnerability with pain, he begins building walls around his emotions. At first, the walls protect him. Then eventually, the walls imprison him. That is the tragedy of emotional detachment. The same defense mechanism that protects the man from pain also protects him from connection, from intimacy, from love, from understanding, from emotional peace. And many men do not realize this until years later. By then, emotional numbness feels normal. But humans were not designed to live emotionally disconnected forever. Even the coldest man still wants understanding somewhere deep inside himself. Even the quietest man wants peace. Even the most detached man wants to feel safe enough to lower his guard. But safety is rare for many men psychologically, so the guard remains up, year after year, until emotional distance becomes personality, and eventually people stop asking what happened to him. They simply label him cold, emotionless, distant, hard to read. But very few people ever ask the deeper question, what did life do to him to make him this way? Because emotionally detached men are usually not empty. They are overloaded with disappointment, pressure, responsibility, betrayal, loneliness, suppressed emotion, and eventually the system shuts down emotionally to survive. That is why some men become emotionless, not because they feel nothing, but because they felt too much for too long, with nowhere safe to put it. And the most dangerous part is this. After years of emotional suppression, many men forget who they were before the armor. They cannot remember the last time they felt genuinely excited, the last time they trusted someone completely, the last time they spoke openly without filtering every word, because constant emotional defense changes identity. The man becomes hyper-aware of risk, hyper-aware of betrayal, hyper-aware of weakness. He studies people constantly, not out of paranoia, but out of survival instinct. A man who has been emotionally blindsided enough times begins predicting disappointment before it happens. He expects abandonment, expects betrayal, expects disrespect, and expectations shape behavior. This is why emotionally detached men often sabotage relationships before they become deep. Distance feels safer than attachment because attachment creates vulnerability, and vulnerability once destroyed him. So now he controls everything emotionally. He controls conversations, controls reactions, controls access to himself. Many emotionally cold men are obsessed with self-control for this exact reason. Control became their replacement for safety. If they stay emotionally disciplined, they cannot be hurt as easily, or at least that is what they tell themselves. But emotional suppression creates another hidden problem. It becomes harder to feel joy too. People think emotional numbness only blocks pain. It does not. It blocks everything: love, warmth, connection, wonder, excitement. The man who suppresses sadness eventually suppresses happiness too, because the human mind does not separate emotions that cleanly. When you shut down one part, the entire emotional system weakens. This is why many emotionally detached men secretly feel empty during moments that should feel meaningful. Success feels temporary. Relationships feel distant. Achievements feel numb, because emotional shutdown disconnects people from their own experiences. And modern culture often mistakes this numbness for strength. The quiet man, the cold man, the stoic man. People admire the image without understanding the internal cost, because true stoicism is not emotional death. Real stoicism means feeling emotion without being controlled by it. But many men were never taught healthy emotional control. They were taught emotional concealment. Those are not the same thing. Concealment says, hide what you feel. Control says, understand what you feel. One creates wisdom, the other creates suppression. And suppressed emotions do not disappear. They transform, sometimes into anger, sometimes into bitterness, sometimes into emotional emptiness. This is why some men become increasingly cynical with age. Every disappointment adds another layer of emotional distance. The failed relationship, the fake friendship, the betrayal, the humiliation, the years of being misunderstood. Eventually, the man stops expecting goodness from people altogether, and once hope disappears, warmth often disappears too. That is why many emotionally detached men appear emotionally dead externally. Internally, many of them simply stopped expecting life to feel safe. And safety matters more to male psychology than most people realize. A man who never feels psychologically safe cannot relax emotionally. He remains guarded constantly, even around people he loves, because the nervous system remembers pain, the body remembers betrayal, the mind remembers humiliation, and memory changes personality, especially unresolved memory. Some men carry emotional wounds for decades without speaking about them once, not because the wounds are small, but because they learned silence was more acceptable than honesty. Many men were raised with one unspoken message: deal with it quietly. So they do, quietly, through isolation, through overwork, through emotional withdrawal, and sometimes through self-destruction, because suppressed emotion eventually searches for escape. Some men escape through ambition, others through addiction, others through disappearing emotionally from everyone around them. But the emotional pain remains underneath. That is why emotionally detached men often have moments where the mask slips unexpectedly. A sudden burst of anger, a random emotional shutdown, an unexplained distance. People around them become confused. But what they are witnessing is emotional exhaustion leaking through the cracks, because nobody can suppress emotion forever perfectly. Eventually the pressure surfaces, and often the man himself does not even understand what he is feeling anymore. He only knows he feels disconnected. Disconnected from people, disconnected from life, disconnected from himself. That internal disconnection is one of the loneliest psychological states a person can experience, because emotional numbness creates invisible isolation. The man can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone internally. Nobody sees the real version of him anymore, not even himself sometimes. And this creates another dangerous cycle. The longer a man remains emotionally detached, the harder vulnerability becomes. Years of emotional armor create emotional stiffness, like rust forming over the personality. Eventually, openness feels unnatural. Even when he wants connection, his instincts resist it, because his nervous system associates emotional openness with danger. So he keeps conversations surface level, keeps emotions controlled, keeps people at a distance, and people mistake his guardedness for arrogance or lack of care. But often, it is fear disguised as control. Fear of disappointment, fear of emotional exposure, fear of becoming weak again. Many emotionally detached men are not trying to avoid love. They are trying to avoid pain disguised as love. There is a difference. And once a man experiences enough emotional pain, he starts prioritizing peace over connection. That is why emotionally detached men often prefer solitude. Solitude feels predictable. People are unpredictable. Solitude does not betray you, does not manipulate you, does not abandon you. So isolation begins feeling emotionally efficient. But humans are not designed for complete emotional isolation. Even highly independent men still need meaning, still need understanding, still need connection. The problem is, many no longer trust those things enough to pursue them fully, so they settle for emotional distance instead. And emotional distance slowly becomes emotional identity. Over time, the man starts believing, this is just who I am. Cold, detached, unemotional, but identity built from pain is still pain. That is something many men realize too late. The emotional armor that protected him at 25 may imprison him at 40, because walls do not only block enemies, they block intimacy too. And eventually some emotionally detached men wake up realizing they survived everything, but no longer feel alive internally. That realization is terrifying, because now the problem is no longer the world. The problem is internal numbness, and numbness is harder to fix than heartbreak. Heartbreak still feels something. Numbness feels nothing. That emptiness can quietly consume years of a man's life. He functions, works, sleeps, repeats routines, but emotionally, he feels absent, like he is watching life instead of living it. This is why emotional healing for men is so difficult. Not because men are incapable of emotion, but because many men buried emotion so deeply they no longer know how to access it safely. And healing requires vulnerability. The exact thing life taught them to fear. That is the paradox. The thing that can heal the emotionally detached man is the same thing that once hurt him. Trust, openness, emotional honesty. But rebuilding those capacities after years of suppression takes enormous psychological courage, because emotionally detached men are often terrified internally of being emotionally exposed again. Not weak, terrified. There is a difference. A man who has suffered deeply often develops intense emotional self-protection mechanisms, and from the outside, those mechanisms look like coldness, but internally, they are survival systems. That is why understanding emotionally detached men requires nuance, not glorification, not condemnation, understanding. Some truly become toxic, manipulative, emotionally unavailable, but many others are simply psychologically exhausted. Exhausted from carrying pain silently for too long. Exhausted from never feeling emotionally safe. Exhausted from constant pressure. Exhausted from pretending everything is fine. And eventually, exhaustion hardens into emotional distance. That distance becomes their normal state, until one day they realize they no longer know how to let people close. Not fully, not honestly. And perhaps the saddest truth of all is this. Many emotionally detached men still deeply crave connection. They simply no longer believe connection is safe, so they remain guarded, quiet, controlled, unreadable. Not because they feel nothing, but because life convinced them feeling too much was dangerous.